coping with the stress is in fact my responsibility and not that of another. So I hear this term a lot. I'm protecting my mental health and I'm protecting my peace, right? Have you heard that? Right.
A lot.
Usually what that means is anything that I perceive as being a threat to my peace and my discomfort is something that I am going to
Through that when it's been passed down generationally. How do you break through that?
One of the things that I do is we talk about landing on some definitions, right? So what is mental health? A lot of times people think that mental health is the absence of stress, or they look at it as a definition or a destination. They look at the definition of mental health as a destination and not a state and a process and an ongoing way to invest in wellness. And I'm going to talk about the definition for a moment, and then I'll go back to your question about what goes on in the house and praying about it, right? One of the things to think about when you're talking about mental health is that it is a state of being that includes the ability to cope with distress and navigate pressures that may include diagnosable mental health conditions, right? So it is not the absence of distress, not necessarily the absence of a diagnosable mental health condition. It is about the ability to cope with those things in a healthy and balanced way. A lot of that starts with perspective. So when you talk about perspective of the Black community, it's really important to think about not just what that perspective is, how it's repeated, but the history of it, where it comes from. So I'll first start with pray about it. Pray about it has value. I have seen prayer work. I've also seen therapy work, and I've also seen medication work. It's not so much that one replaces the other, but there is a way that all can exist. And sometimes the answer to prayer is the support that you can get from others in the form of therapy and or medication if that's necessary, right? When we talk about things that stay in our house, we have to think about the historical implications of that. Some things that could leave our house could actually be the matter of life and death in our history. And we could talk all about how that history is continuing to be informed by that philosophy. Some things change and some things we still are struggling with, quite frankly. There are still some things that as an individual, as a Black woman, it's going to be very difficult to have some level of understanding and humility from others outside of the community to understand what that really means for me, right? What that really means to my family. So it's not so much about being closed off, but it is about being wise and discreet. Having discretion, in other words, not discreet where you're secretive, but having discretion. It may not be in my best interest to share everything with everyone. And we also have to have a goal in mind. So when I am speaking about things outside of my house, quote unquote, what is the purpose and what is the goal of that? And is this the place to get that? Does that make sense? I hope I'm answering your question.
No, it does. I wanted to go back to the original portion where you said, when I said pray about it, and you said prayer works. I've seen prayer work. I've also seen therapy work. I've also seen medicine work, right? I totally agree. I actually do believe in a balance. I'm not really, this is just my honest opinion. It's not really, I don't look at the medication side more. I'm more of a balance of the therapy and prayer. But my question would be next. So when do you know when you should institute one or the other or all three? What epiphany do you have to have?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think that's individual for people, right? I will say this, that when it comes to, when you get to a point, and I'm going to speak to this just from the mental health perspective, when there is a diagnosable mental health condition. When we talk about mental health, this is why definitions are so important. So as an individual who started my career, and I am still very much hands-on and very much committed to being able to talk about mental health from a very distinct and educated platform, if that makes sense. So being very specific about what mental health is and what mental health is not. I can appreciate the conversations that are being had about mental health right now. I really can. The more the conversation is had, the less confident we can be that every time we're having the conversation, we're all talking about the same thing. So that's why I start with the definition of what mental health is and what it is not. So when we talk about mental health as a diagnosable condition, we're talking about symptoms that are impacting daily functioning to the extent that there are barriers to being able to function at optimal wellness, right? But it's a continuum. So it could be from mild to severe. But a lot of times, and the reason why I'm saying this is because right now, when I hear people talk about mental health, once they start talking and they start describing things, what they're actually describing is discomfort. It's not that this is a mental health condition. This is that I'm uncomfortable with what's happening. I'm uncomfortable with being responsible for my responses to distress. And I'm also uncomfortable with the idea that coping with distress is in fact my responsibility and not that of another. So I hear this term a lot. I'm protecting my mental health and I'm protecting my peace, right? Have you heard that? Right.
A lot.
Usually what that means is anything that I perceive as being a threat to my peace and my discomfort is something that I am going to avoid, push away, and blame another person for. And none of this is, I believe, is ill-intended, and none of it is a judgment or a condemnation. These are observations that I'm making, right? And it's important, again, to have that conversation about what mental health is and what is stress. and what type of stress I'm facing. Is this good stress, the type of stress that motivates me to do my best, study hard for a test, be on time for work, right? Is this neutral stress where it just is what it is? This is part of the human condition, right? Or is it toxic stress? Is it something else that has the potential to create a deeper impact on my life, my well-being, how I think, how I process, how I feel, how I respond to information? And so when you start to see things where there are solutions that are being applied that are not actually moving the problem away, but they're actually contributing to keeping the problem the same, so it's maintaining the problem and or making the problem worse, then that's when I know I might need to pivot and adjust. If I'm praying and it works, keep doing it. If it's not working, then I need to pivot and adjust. It doesn't mean that I stop praying, but maybe I need to look at what I'm praying about, what I'm praying for, how I'm praying, what am I doing after I pray? How am I following up? What am I following through with, right? I hope that makes sense.
No, it actually does. Because I came from that house of, let's pray about it. Let's pray about it. Or I also came from that household, it stays in here. Don't be going out there telling my business. And that went to school, that went to church, that went everybody.
It went to grandma's house. You don't tell your grandma to go
tell what going on in this house.
I said that to my kids.
Business. And growing up with that, being a kid, growing up into that, and it can have its own.
It absolutely can.
Its own scars, or that's what you bring into your household, right?
Absolutely.
And it took a lot for me to take a portion of that out of my household, dealing with things like that. But when you say that, you made total sense. I just wanted to know, and you said something with regards to the symptoms and how those symptoms show up and how those symptoms arrive. And eventually you're looking at, from those symptoms, you're walking it back and reversing it to see what the root cause is, right? So why does that symptom show up?
And even in that, and I want to circle back to something else you said, because I want to be clear, especially for people who are listening, that some things in our houses, they need some exposure. Right? There are just some things that are happening, abuse, things like that. They need some exposure. I think what we have to also consider in that are the things that everything has like costs and benefits, right? We have to be able to look at the benefits and the drawbacks as well. And we take those together, not separately. So we have to understand that an exposure brings with it a lot of other stuff. I hear this a lot of times when I'm talking to social workers who struggle with disclosures that come out of the house that really can impact the house to the extent of disrupting a family where people are taken out of the home. We also have to consider, and I'm not saying that you don't do that legally and ethically. There's some things that we have to do, right? There's some protections that need to be in place, right? But we also have to consider that everything about what we do as a community, everything that a person does, even as an individual, is not wholly negative and it's not wholly positive either. There's a lot between what we can just describe in one way. So yeah, we do have some rules about what we say in the house, and that could be defined from house to house. But to your point, yeah, we sometimes just parent out of habit or spite. Like I parent because that's what I saw my parents do, or I parent despite what my parents did to prove that they were wrong.
Yep.
So I have a different question. When you had said earlier about mental health, is it hiding something that you really don't want to address? Because I'm just thinking sometimes there's a fine line, meaning if you walk away, whether it be a family member or parent, because you've grown up and there's certain things that you're not going to deal with anymore. Not necessarily there's a problem, but look, you know what? You're a toxic person. This isn't good for me. I'm walking away. So technically, yes, I'm walking away from something else, which is that individual per se. But again, I guess I'm looking at the fine line is I'm okay because I walked away. But yes, I don't want to deal with the undercurrent of what makes me feel this way when I'm with that person. Does that make sense?
It does. It absolutely does. And I think what we're talking about are, in some sense, swooping generalizations, right?
Yeah.
When I talk about avoidance, and I think that's what you're referring to when I said before that it's about avoidance. I blame other people. I don't want to, okay, that might be a separate issue. Then I'm actually dealing with a toxic person. I think the point that I really want to stress here though, is that we really have to be careful when we're talking about these things. And I'll just say this for me as a clinician, I'm careful about when I'm talking about these things. I want to know when someone says to me, I have a toxic person in my life, what that means.
Okay.
But sometimes a toxic person in my life means this is someone who holds me accountable.
Okay.
That is uncomfortable for me.
Okay. Now, what would you say? I'm going to stick here a little bit because when I say social media, you have people who come on social media. That's why I avoid Facebook a lot because there's a lot of internet therapists on Facebook and on Instagram.
So I appreciate you sharing that.
There's a lot of them on there. And a lot of times they can make statements that are or they can respond to things in a flat manner. And what I mean by flat, sometimes the answer is not as black and white. Sometimes there's some gray and there's nuance. There's some layers.
Absolutely.
But when you profess to be this, you've been given the term of an internet therapist on here, and you have a lot of people following you. You have a lot of following now because you said some buzzwords, you've made some sense sometimes. And so now you have a following. So you have people actually looking to you and DMing you and asking you for your opinion, and you have no real, you just have life experience or lived experience. Do you think that, you said it could be both? It can be harmful, but it also can be helpful. I would say it's more harmful in ways because a lot of times we like to, especially in our community, we like to give people who don't necessarily have the credentials. They don't know what they're saying to someone, and someone may be taking what they're saying as Bible, quote unquote Bible, and they really should be talking to someone who has a bit more experience. How do we navigate that as a community?
I think that's a really good question. The reason why I say it can be helpful is because it's a great conversation starter. And so hopefully when Google doctors are on the internet and talking about things, there are some disclaimers about sitting with a licensed professional. But we also have to understand, the reason why I say it's good is because we also have to understand that for some individuals, there are barriers, and that there could barriers to sitting with a licensed clinician. And I don't want to get into all of that, but you hear what I'm saying when I say that there are barriers. There are things that may make it difficult to do, but a moment to have a conversation to recognize that you're not alone, and that mental health does exist, and that there is help out there. It's a great conversation starter, hopefully leading someone to be able to sit with someone personally. So hopefully maybe some of these licensed clinicians will offer services pro bono. I don't know. There are people who are going to listen to this podcast today, and they are going to be so upset by perhaps some of the things that I've said. And I'm happy for you all to share my contact information for people to contact me directly, right? For follow-up questions, or you have questions or concerns about anything that was said.
Absolutely.
But to the point, and the reason why it could be helpful, I mentioned conversation starter, right? And pointing people in a direction. But it's really important, I think, first and foremost, for us to acknowledge that your mental health and well-being is the responsibility of the individual first.
Yep.
And so with that said, reputable sources, and I'm not knocking anybody because I don't want the people coming for me. I'm not knocking anybody who practices on the social media, internet webs, as I call it, right? But pointing someone, I think, to a licensed clinician in their area is part of the responsibility, right? Being able to say, okay, do you have medical coverage? Here's some websites where you can view the profiles of licensed clinicians, see if they have a sliding scale, see if they offer services free, see if there is a place that can really back up any services that they render. And so it's really important as a responsible individual to know that anything that you hear from someone about health and well-being is not to replace direct services, right? So I'm not going to listen to a doctor or a legal professional without acknowledging that what I hear might be helpful and it's an entry point, but I don't take it as personal care.
Right.
That's a long-winded way of answering your question.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I also want to add the other risk of dealing with these internet therapists. They have no confidentiality, right? So what you say to them, they have not taken an oath to keep what you said to them private. Anything that you DM them, don't get on their bad side. We see it all the time. They're screenshotting your text messages and putting them up,
didn't know
for
that.
people to,
I don't follow
by laws and ethics. So let me say that our profession is governed by law and ethics. Anyone that you're sitting with, and I do this, the very first thing that I do is go over disclosure, what you can reasonably expect in therapy with me, what the process looks like, what it entails, what I can do legally and ethically, what I'm not allowed to do legally and ethically, and perhaps even what I am most proficient at. In case you're looking for something different, I can point you in the direction of where you could get that from. So the responsibility piece is both moral, or I should say all three. It's moral, it's legal, and it's ethical. So if you're not getting that covered, then there is a difference between having a therapeutic conversation and engaging in therapy. Psychology is a science. Therapy is an application of that science. If you are not sitting with a scientist, a licensed clinician, in other words, then the services that you are getting are not therapy. They might be counseling. There's a difference. They might be life coaching. That's a difference. But I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. So when you sit with me, you are going to get therapy as an application of the science of psychology.
That brings up a point I had too, because what if there's a person that just clearly just needs to talk, and they're thinking that there's a problem, but then after they sit with you, then you realize, no, you need to go down the hall, that this isn't what this is. Because, and the reason why I bring it up, because there are a lot of people that are lonely. If I'm paying you, you're going to listen to me. I have a friend of mine that's a nurse, and there's people that come in and they like getting shots. So you have to weed them out, because that's an issue with that person. So I say to you, do you come across every once in a while people, they just literally want to come because they want to talk and have conversation, and it's time out because they just want to be in your presence.
They need
so
a
to
friend.
speak. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's the first. Yes, I do come across people that way. I do not keep people on my schedule who are very clear about the fact that's what they want.
Yeah.
What I can do when that is the case is we find ways to work together so that perhaps that is a therapeutic goal. Maybe the goal of therapy then becomes to help you in gender spaces and to be a part of great spaces where you can socialize and be friends. Is there a barrier to you having a paid friend? That doesn't have to be, right? Because I'm not going to be a paid friend. So I'm very clear. I have very clear clinical boundaries. I don't meet with friends and I don't meet with clients who become friends. We're not friends. We could be friendly, but we're not friends. I mean, case in point, this is so funny. I had someone recently that was meeting with me for therapy. And so we were talking. And, I just wanted to check in with you. We always talk about me. I just wanted to see how you were doing. And I thought that was so kind and so wonderful. But we talk about you because you're in therapy. I'm not. This is your space. This is your therapeutic space. And it is not about me in any way.
Yeah.
I have my spaces, but it's not when I'm performing as a therapist. And so, I make that very clear from the beginning. This is not place therapy. Venting is not therapy. It doesn't mean that it doesn't happen in therapy. I'm clear about it. Doesn't mean we don't talk. I tell people all the time, if it's important to you and it comes up here, it comes up here.
Yeah, within context.
Therapy has goals and you need to graduate.
Funny you should say that about graduating. Because there's times when there's people that, and I'm referring to TV shows, when back in the day when everybody was going to a therapist and they were on the couch and different TV shows. And they're like, oh, I've been in therapy for 15, 20 years. At how long? And I know it's individual. That part I do realize, but how long is too long when you really need to get out and do this? You're at that starting line. You just need to go and do it.
I think what you're saying is a really great question that a lot of people have. And I had to laugh when you said we see it on TV. No, they don't. They portray us poorly on TV. I very rarely see a therapist portrayed accurately. Let me just say that. I digress. So again, it's about establishing goals. What is our goal, right? Once we start to see gains toward that goal, and research backs up on this. Once you get a person who is in therapy and they start to accomplish whatever their therapeutic goal is, and then they stay in therapy beyond that, the gains that they had start to decline. So staying in therapy longer than you need it is contraindicated. It does more harm than it does good.
Yeah. It's like a crutch, I would think, but
yes,
I'm not a therapist, so
crutch is a good word, but I will say this, it is about having in place measures that track success. So you have to have a clear goal first and foremost, and then ways to track the success toward that goal. And then once you hit that, you graduate.
We're going to transition to our next question.
What is that, question number 2?
No, but I think we tackled some things that really need to be said, and hopefully people will. That objective for me was to hopefully encourage people, especially us, because the statistics show that we handle a lot of things either internally or we don't talk to people, right?